I've always wanted to share this, but never could find the right place. For reference, at the time this all began, I was 14 and a freshman in high school, back in 2008 or 2009, so not so recent. It all began during the first couple of weeks of school. I went to the school district all my life and never had any real issues. I had basically no enemies and only friends. Anyway, it all began one Friday afternoon after school. I was hanging out with friends outside of the school until my mom came to pick me up, when I decided to go upstairs to my locker and put a textbook away. I was originally going to bring it home for the weekend, but when I got to my locker, there was a note taped to it. My name was written on it with a heart around it, and I read it. It was a love letter signed, "Your Secret Admirer." Thinking it was a friend playing a prank, I laughed it off and tossed it in the trash. When I confronted them downstairs, they denied that they put a note on my locker and insisted that it was probably from some boy. I didn't know what to think, but I did think of a few cute guys I went to school with and hoped it was from one of them. I sighed and thought that it could have been anyone, and it was most likely none of them. 2 months go by. During this time, we had a school picture day and my mom had ordered some, which were eventually given to us during one of our classes. I kept them in my locker so I wouldn't lose them. It was a Friday, and I was going to stay after school with my friends again and hang around until the high school football game was over later in the evening. I waited until about 2 hours after school ended or so to grab my belongings out of my locker, including the photos. I put them in my backpack and headed on outside and hung out around the football field with my friends until people started showing up for the game. At that point, we walked around or sat in the grass and talked for the rest of the evening. When I got home that night, I gave my mom the photos, and she noticed that one of the wallet-sized photos had been cut off from the rest. I had never bothered to look at all of them, so I wasn't aware of this. I told her I didn't cut one off, but she didn't believe me. I didn't know what to think of it. A few weeks go by, and I all but forgot about the missing photo. I found another note taped to my locker, and this time, one of my school photos was in it with a heart drawn around my head. A wallet-sized photo. The note made mention of how beautiful I looked during the game, sitting with my friends in the grass, talking and laughing. This made me uncomfortable. Whoever was doing this had stolen one of my photos, either from out of my locker during school, which means they had my lock combination on that Friday, or while I left my backpack unattended during the football game. Once again, I thought it was probably one of my friends playing a prank on me, and I didn't say anything about it. It had been several months since the last note. Things took a rather stressful turn the following week. I was at home after school one day alone, while my mom was working a double shift, when someone came knocking on my front door. Thinking it was a pesky neighbor, I took my sweet time to answer it, and opened the door to find nobody there. I looked around and saw nothing but other mobile homes and neighbors' cars. I shut the door and resumed what I was doing. I heard the knocking again about 10 minutes later. I took my time again to answer it, and found Mike, one of our only friendly male neighbors, there with his Boston Terrier on a leash. He asked me if I had had somebody over, which obviously I didn't. He then told me that he had seen somebody snooping around my home a few minutes ago. I felt uncomfortable, and said that I didn't have anyone over. I asked who it was, and he said he couldn't recognize him. I thanked him and locked all my doors and windows after he left. The next month was full of incidents where our motion sensor backlight would come on in the evening. It was all capped off by my mom calling the police, after she found a dead rabbit nailed to our back porch in a rather cruel fashion. At the time, I never would have imagined that the notes, the snooping around, and now the dead rabbit was the work of someone who had been stalking me in the shadows for the last several months. But it all came into fruition the following day at school. I found the final note taped to my locker. There was a bulge in it, and when I took it apart, the foot of a rabbit fell onto the floor in front of me. I shrieked in terror as a teacher came running up to me and I pointed out the rabbit's foot. He picked it up and asked me where it came from. I showed him the note, and we immediately went to the office and showed the vice principal what we had found. Later in the day, I was called into the office and found my mom there with the principal and vice principal. It was there that I had to recount the events over the last couple of months for the first time to anyone, and give the names of students that I think may have been responsible, based on any suspicious interactions. But I had never had any with anyone that had seemed off to me. They told me that if anything were to happen again, to let them know, and they'd get the police involved if my life appeared to be in danger. My mom had already contacted a state trooper who had visited our home the previous night about the rabbit's foot, and how a student may have been involved in it. From that day onward, nothing else major happened. However, about halfway through my junior year, I got another love letter. This time, instead of being written by hand, it was typed out and signed, "Your secret admirer from freshman year." I had all but forgotten about what had happened during that time. I kept this note and gave it to the principal, who kept it as evidence in case things escalated again. But they never did. Luckily, nothing else ever happened afterwards either. At least, nothing that was obvious. This happened quite a while ago. I had moved into an apartment all by myself as a barely 20-year-old. I worked as a server 6 nights a week. It was hard work and long hours, but it paid the bills. Some backstory here. I was taking some time off from college after my freshman year, after realizing I wasn't quite ready for that responsibility, but I still wanted to be on my own and not living in my parents'. My tiny apartment was on the first floor, and had huge old-fashioned roll-out windows in the living room, the kind you had to turn a little crank to make the large panes open out, but just a few other smaller windows in the kitchen and bedroom. I couldn't find curtains to cover the huge living room windows without spending an arm and a leg, so I just bought some from a thrift store that were more decorative than effective. It was in an okay neighborhood in a semi-large Midwestern city. Frankly, I couldn't afford a high rent, and I had barely any credit since I was so young, so I was happy with the balance I had struck. The apartment was small and had an old model refrigerator and an ancient air conditioner, but the neighborhood was pretty good. If you drove 5 minutes south, though, you'd be in the worst part of the city. The restaurant I worked at didn't close until 11 p.m. weekdays and 2 a.m. on the weekends, so I would always stay up very late with only my cat Edgar to keep me company. I would usually come home after working and sit on the floor in the middle of my living room and play Nintendo for a few hours before going to bed. It was on one late summer night while I was playing Mario Bros. When I looked up and saw a man standing in the window. My windows were fully rolled out because it was a hot night, and I'm pretty sure this stranger had to duck his head under the rolled out window pane to get as close a look as he was to the screen. He was just staring at me. I froze. I sat there frozen with what I'm sure was a look of terror on my face. The man was quiet for a few seconds, but then he said nonchalantly, "Oh, sorry. I didn't mean to scare you. I just saw your light on and I live right across from you. I wanted to come over and say hi." I responded quietly with an, hi. I still remember how scared I was in that moment. He was broad-shouldered, weak-chinned, and probably in his late 30s. I didn't want to run away because there was just a cheap window screen between us, and he was bigger than me, but I also didn't want to make small talk with a new neighbor at 2 in the morning. He continued with, "Hey, I'm staying at my buddy's place while they're away. I see your cat in the window a lot. What's his name? I come over and play with him in the window all the time. I can tell he really likes me." Again, I didn't know what to say. I did sometimes leave the window rolled out just enough for Edgar's fat little body to fit through while I wasn't home so he could sit in the windowsill and watch the birds. I didn't think anyone could fit through how slightly I left them open. Apparently, this guy was coming over and standing outside to chill with my cat. His name is Edgar. I have to go to bed now, so maybe I'll see you around, I guess. I was just trying to get him to leave so I could close the window without making him angry at me. He didn't seem fazed by anything and said, Edgar. That's a great name. Now I know what to call you." He said this to my cat, who had jumped up onto the windowsill. "Well, if you ever want to come over and drink or something, I live just right there." He said this while pointing to the house next door, its windows directly facing mine. Okay, well, I better go. It's late and I'm really tired." "Okay, I know you work a lot. I love your cat. Come over sometime." He leaves as I frantically roll the windows closed. I turn off the lights and stand to one side of the living room to see if I could still see him. I could, sort of. The apartment he had pointed out was completely dark, except I could see the small cherry of a burning cigarette going up and down very slowly. Great. He's smoking in the dark, facing my apartment. I imagined calling the police and telling them my neighbor had just come over and complimented my cat. Instead, I decided to just close everything up tight and try to go to bed. I was too scared to turn the lights off, so I lay in bed with the ancient air conditioner grinding away and all the lights on. That was, until all the lights went out and everything went silent. My apartment was pitch black and completely silent. I eventually pep-talked myself into getting a flashlight and checking the fuse box. Yep, the air conditioner that I rarely used because I preferred open windows had blown a fuse. I replaced it from a small box of fuses the landlord had given me and spent a sleepless night in my too-hot apartment. The next day, I called the non-emergency police line and told them what had happened. They sent a cop over a couple of hours after I called. The policeman who came to my apartment asked me about all the details. I pointed out the apartment the man had come from. The policeman seemed very stern and scary to me at the time. He told me I should have told that man to get out of my window and go away the minute I saw him, and immediately called 911. He said he would drive by my apartment for the next couple of weeks to make the police presence known, and that he would talk to the man. Maybe he did, but I never heard from that man or the police again, so I moved not long after that. To start, I go to school in Boston. For privacy reasons, I'm not going to include the name of the school, but if anyone reading this also goes here, I think you'll be able to figure it out. So at the end of the spring semester last year, one of the dorm buildings on campus was closed for renovations. Since then, construction crews have been constantly working on completely stripping the building and redoing it entirely. Lately, it's become a bit of an issue because the dorm I'm living in right now was right next to it, so residents are often woken up very early in the morning to the work being done. In response, the school set up a meeting for students to voice their concerns to the project manager and members of the administration here. Obviously, nothing can be done to stop the construction. They just want to make it look like they care and are trying to do something about it. I'll get back to this later. Anyways, on a few occasions I've seen workers doing work right outside my window. There's probably about a 20-foot gap between my room and a part of the building having all the construction being done, so I have a really clear view of anyone out there. If my windows are open, I can also hear them talking. I never really thought much of it. I expected to see people there. The weird thing is that sometimes the workers would show up very late, between the hours of 12:30 a.m. and 2 a.m. late. I usually notice because I'll see flashlights moving outside my window and hear the door that leads onto the roof opening and shutting. At first I was a little weirded out by it. Why would they need to be up there that late? As it continued though, I just started ignoring it because I figured it was just some late night crew or security that went up to make sure nothing was out of place. As I very recently found out though, that's not the case. About a week ago I was lying in bed trying to fall asleep. Suddenly a brief flash lit up the room. I looked around for a minute, and then it happened again. I looked out the window and realized it was just the workers walking around on the roof with flashlights. I ignored them and tried to fall asleep. Before I could even close my eyes though, I heard a conversation ensue. "He's sleeping," a deep voice said. "Yeah, looks like it," responded another voice. "Tonight?" asked the first voice. No, let's wait a little while longer." "Whatever you say." Soon after, I heard the door shut and peeked out the window to see both of them had left. I stayed frozen in my bed for a while, wondering if they had been talking about me. I eventually told myself they were talking about a friend of theirs or something, and I had nothing to worry about. I closed my eyes and fell asleep. When I woke up, I was a little worried, so I asked my roommates if they'd ever seen or heard those guys out there. Both of them thought I was joking, but I assured them I was very serious. Both said they had no idea what I was talking about. They didn't come back for another week, but before I saw them again, I decided to attend the sit-down the school had set up. When it was my turn to speak, I asked about the late-night crew. I wanted to know why they were up there so late, and if it was entirely necessary, as it was preventing me from getting a full night's rest. The project manager just stared at me for a moment. "Late-night crew?" he asked. "Yeah, the guys who come out there sometimes really late, and just kind of walk around with flashlights," I responded. He stared at me for another moment or so. "We don't have a late-night crew," he said in a quiet voice. No one said anything. Everyone was just staring at me. Someone from the administration said that it was maybe homeless people who had found their way up onto the roof. Maybe they were using it as shelter, and that they would keep a better eye on the entrances to the building at night. There are a lot of impoverished individuals in the area, so it sort of made sense. The only part I was still confused about was that the people weren't staying up there all night, but just for about 5 to 10 minutes. I decided not to mention that part. That was 2 days ago. I didn't see anyone that night, but last night is a different story. Same as usual. I was lying in bed trying to fall asleep when I heard the door creep open again. This time there were no flashlights. Very slowly, I strained my neck to get a good look out the window while still remaining hidden. I saw 2 figures standing on the roof, facing towards my window. Nothing happened for about 30 seconds, and then one of them said something. I recognized the 2 voices as the same ones from before. Their conversation went a little like this. "Did you get that email from Bill?" Bill is the project manager. "Yeah, looks like this isn't gonna work out, huh?" "Guess not. You think he's listening right now?" "It's possible." "Are you? Can you hear us, buddy? Are you listening over there?" At this point, my heart was practically beating through my chest. I didn't know how to react. I just stayed in the same position, completely frozen and hoping they would leave. "Cut it out. We really shouldn't be up here much longer." "What? I'm just messing around." "But yeah, you're right. Looks like this is goodbye, bud. But don't worry though. We'll be seeing you around." After a brief moment of neither of them speaking, they both turned to the door and walked away. I didn't sleep much last night because of that. I don't really know how to handle something like this, and if I should bring it up with the school again. Based on what they said though, it seems like they won't be around anymore. Still though, these guys know where I live. I can only hope they haven't seen my face, but I think I'll be avoiding the construction area for a while. So a few people asked me to post another of my stories from my time working private security and the let's not meet moments I've had. This happened about 2 years ago. It's the last and final private security gig I've had. It's also what made me say fuck it and join up with my dad in the Pacific Northwest. So I worked out in Beverly Hills, California. I was a guard at a luxury community. This place was the creme de la creme. They had strict policies in place as far as security went. That didn't stop paparazzi or other strange folk from trying to get in, but we would more often than not cut them off at the knees. There were no less than 4 of us on patrol at any given time. 2 at the guard shack watching the folks entering, and 2 running patrol in a golf cart. One night we were short-staffed there, and it was just myself and Big D. Names have been changed for this story. D was huge, and he was a former bouncer. He had at one time been a bodyguard for Britney Spears. He had to use the restrooms, so he decided to go on patrol, and then run by the clubhouse to use the facility. So I'm chilling in the guard shack, which was actually a pretty nice little office, when our phone rings. Now the only people that could call into us were residents, or someone calling from the clubhouse or pool area. I answer, but there's nothing on the other end, just heavy breathing. I look to see who's calling, and it's coming from the clubhouse. At first, I think it's D fucking around. I tell him to go fuck himself and hang up on him. A few minutes go by, and I'm flipping through my manga when the phone rings again. It's from the clubhouse, so I answer it, and tell D to finish up his shit and come back. Heavy breathing, and then a raspy voice. That's not nice, Nate. It's not D, obviously, because I see him coming back in the golf cart. Now I'm petrified as to who the hell is calling. The creepy voice giggles and then hangs up. I toss my manga aside and fly out the door. I tell D what happened, and how the dude knew my name. D thinks I'm fucking around because we often play jokes on each other, and says he'll go check it out. I tell him he better call our boss, but he rolls his eyes and tells me he'll be right back. Besides, he never got to use the restroom after all. So I go back into the shack and I try to calm down, when the phone rings again. I don't want to answer it, but I do. It's more heavy breathing. I'd had enough, so I called our boss, who bitched about it but came down. D meanwhile gets back, and the dude looks like he saw a ghost. He tells us he's in the restroom in the clubhouse, and someone comes in as he's going to the bathroom. They don't say anything, just heavy breathing. They get into the stall next to him, and just as he's flushing, he looks up and some man wearing a mask covering his eyes and most of his face is just staring at him with the most peculiar grin. D screams as he pulls on his pants, and the guy books it. Our boss wrote it off as a teenager playing a prank, and he wouldn't let us call the cops. He said it had to be a resident who knows my name, as we do wear badges. I wanted to quit, but I didn't that night. The next weekend I'm at work. D is in the booth with me, and we're talking about the Lakers game when the phone rings. D answers and says it's for me. I take it, wondering who would ask for me specifically, but when I answer, there's nothing for a second, and then that horrible breathing again. I look at D and then at the phone. I hang up. We told the two other guards to stay there and we take off for the clubhouse. When we get there, it's quiet. We start going through the game room, then the kitchen, and we peek into both bathrooms, but we don't see anything. Then we get radioed that one of the others saw a figure jumping over the wall. The walls were pretty high, and they said he or she scaled it with no problems. We call the cops, as we're supposed to do if someone gets in, and they come and sweep the area. Meanwhile, one of my coworkers finds a notebook outside the clubhouse, like it had fallen out of someone's pocket. It was one of those small lined notebooks with the pages that tear out. In it, someone had written not only my full name, but every security officer that worked there's name and our home address. After learning that, I quit. I was making good money, and I liked my coworkers, but knowing that he or she knew my name and where I lived made my decision to quit and move up to where my dad lived much easier. From what I've heard, D and my former coworkers said they only heard the heavy breathing man one more time, but it was enough that 3 more of them quit, including D. My former boss and the police think it was a former coworker, but they never figured out who or if it was. What is up, guys? Blue Spooky here, as always. I just wanted to thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. If you guys enjoyed the video, please feel free to leave feedback in the comments below, as well as perhaps like, share, or subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you have a personal story that you'd like to submit, or you'd like to just send me a message, links to all of my social media will be in the description for the video below. This includes my Gmail, Twitter, and Facebook accounts. go ahead and send me a message on any of those, and I'll try to get back to you as soon as possible. If you do decide to send in a story, please be sure to include in the tagline what the theme of the story is, if it has any, the name of the story, and how you would like to be credited in the description of the video the story appears in. If you're curious at all about the music used in this video, the music is always listed in the description below, in the order which it appears. I also have links to the artists and list the tracks by name, just in case you want to find more of their work. Last but not least, if you have any criticism, please be sure to leave it in the comments below, as I'm always looking for new ways to improve the channel. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.